This is the World Satsanga, held on the 29th of April 2017 in conjunction with Kevin Moore and The Moore Show. And welcome to this April Satsanga. There's plenty of questions this particular Satsanga, so lots to go through, lots of deep-seated and deeply searching questions. That's a mouthful, isn't it? And first of all, though, I'll just go through the agenda. So I've got a small talk by myself just to go over what's happening to the world spiritually. Why do things appear to be falling apart when it was previously looking so good? And then we've got the questions we're going through. I've got 4 sets of questions, although some of them are nested together. And I've also got the end of meditation, where I'm going to go through a different way to open the third eye, which isn't the same as February's Satsanga, but it is a way that I tend to use myself, although it is rather mechanical in terms of the interpretation of the visualizations. Okay, so the very first thing then is what's happening to the world spiritually, and why do things appear to be falling apart when it's previously looking so good? You know, with things like what's happening in Syria, what's happening with various different elections all over the world, and you know, in terms of people starting to move back towards the more material aspect of our existence rather than spiritual existence, with people who are previously quite spiritual sort of abandoning their spiritual thought processes, behaviours and actions, and moving towards a more, you know, immersed incarnation, as it were. And really what's going on is that, you know, there's lots of different things happening to us. I mean, and this particular talk will actually encompass a couple of different things in terms of that I've expressed in previous lectures, in terms of the sawtooth profile. We go up and we go down, even though the average is to go up. And there's lots of different things that are making us look at our reality again, because there's things that shouldn't really have happened that have happened. And so what's really happening is that we are in a state of, shall I say, I wouldn't say confusion, but we're not really in a cohesive state globally. Now, previously we've had a level of collective thought processes, collective consciousness in terms of which way we're going to go. You know, the whole world, in some respect, was living in an optimistic state. We were all moving up the frequencies. Even those areas where there's been conflict, there was a start to move away from the conflict and start to move into a more cohesive state, where we're all thinking about, you know, what can we do for our population, what can we do for those individuals that we govern, and what can we do for each other. And so what's going on is really we're experiencing pockets of locally low frequency mixed in with pockets of locally high frequency. And so from the perspective of those individuals who are in a locally low frequency, and this can be a whole country, for instance, or a number of countries knitted together, is that there's a subconscious movement back into being immersed in the human condition, the incarnate condition that we normally have when we are a lower frequency. And of course there are those individuals who are by choice totally immersed in their human condition, because that's what they want to do, is from their own evolutionary perspective. And there are those who are normally immersed, full stop, because of their own evolutionary condition doesn't allow them, or isn't to a level where they can start to experience a frequential increase, because they are so immersed in their incarnate condition that they can't possibly move out of that, and the environment that they're in may well support that. And so people who live in difficult situations and who are in a difficult environment may remain focused upon that environment and those conditions rather than breaking out of it. And so it's everything is you know, in that locally low area is difficult to move from, and in some respects gets worse in terms of the frequency. It gets lower because things get more difficult. It's more difficult for them to break out of it, and so rather than, you know, maintaining a status quo or going higher up the frequencies, they are actually at best maintaining a status quo, but in normal conditions they are starting to spiral down the frequencies. Whereas on the other side we have areas within the Earth which are a locally high frequency. And so we have people who are moving up the frequencies, who are moving up really, really quite quickly, but they are starting to also experience different thought processes, things that they would have not done normally had they been working totally within the spiritual, and should I say, a more advanced or a higher frequential level, or a more in a condition where there's more evolutionary content associated with who and what they are, are starting to think slightly lower as well. Things that were, that they wouldn't have done. For instance, throwing trash out of the car window. As we may laugh at this, but this is one of the things that's happening. People who wouldn't have done that are naturally sort of doing this and thinking, oh, well, it doesn't matter, somebody else can clean it up, or nature will degrade the product or the wrapper. They'll just throw out of the window. And people are doing this more and more these days. And so basically people who are spiritual are starting to drop back down into the more immersed state as well, so that their frequencies are also dropping down. So they start to see themselves going down as well, but seem to accept it. And this is the issue, you see. We even if we're in a locally high frequency and we start to become attracted to thoughts, behaviours and actions that are basically aligned to lower frequencies, we start to accept the behaviours and actions of those lower frequencies. And so it's quite difficult for us to move out of that as well. And then the other side, we have individuals who are in a locally higher frequency state, who see all this happening and wonder what's going on. Why are people that they know moving down the frequencies? Why are they struggling to work with the environment that they're in? Why are they also having feelings of doubt or thoughts of doubt, and their behaviours and actions are being challenged in terms of they're having to challenge themselves on a regular basis, in terms of using the observer self to constantly check on how they're thinking, how they're behaving, and how they're acting, to make sure that they're a higher frequential state. And so this is what's happening. We're having these pockets of locally low, locally really low, because I haven't mentioned that. That's where we've got seriously low frequency issues happening. Things like areas where, third world countries where somebody's completely immersed in a low frequency environment, where existence, physical existence itself is a challenge. So we've got locally really low, locally high, and locally very high frequencies. And so the whole world right now, rather than having a baseline frequency that is being worked with and everybody has got access to, and they're working with, and they're starting to work with themselves and work with those individuals around them, they are, and everybody's got a head start, so to speak, and those who are of higher frequency are going higher, and those who are of lower frequency are going higher as well. We're starting to get this situation where it is completely random. There is no baseline frequency. It is pockets of high, pockets of low, pockets of very high, pockets of very low, and so everything appears to be in a complete state of randomness and with complete lack of cohesion. And so what's happening now is that it is appearing to all fall apart. When actually it isn't so much falling apart, it's that because we've been exposed to a higher frequency environment and a higher frequency series of thoughts, behaviours and actions, that we are noticing that things are dropping down. So although those individuals who are existing in low frequencies or locally low frequencies or locally very low frequencies don't specifically know it, they would be starting to think, behave and act in a way which is, well, why is it getting worse? Even though they're very immersed, they might have this subconscious thought process, it's getting worse than it was, and it was bad in the first place. And so they're really struggling with that, and they can't break out of it. Whereas those who are in locally high frequencies or locally very high are either dropping down to the immersed incarnation state, or are starting to question what's going on and starting to see what's going on, and are actually starting to stop this downward spiral into accepting bad behaviour, accepting bad thoughts, accepting bad actions, so to speak. Now, clearly, there's no good or bad, and we know this, but there's a certain way in which one should act, one should behave, and one should think in a more highly evolved way if one is going to move up the frequencies. And so the falling apart thinking and thought process is based upon the ability to be able to observe this happening around us and work with it and fight against it and move forwards. So really, it's something that there's only a few advanced individuals will be spotting and trying to rectify within themselves. And so it's almost like a bit of a challenge, really, because we've been in the dark ages when we've been in low frequency conditions. We've had to use various different robust, repeatable but basic techniques to move us up the frequency, such as Kriya Yoga, such as some of the Buddhist principles and Hindu principles. And then we've moved up the frequencies, and we've been able to sort of bypass some of these low frequency but robust methods of moving up the frequencies by leapfrogging different frequency levels, because we are already a higher frequency, so we can go higher and higher faster using very advanced techniques, but without needing to know the basics to support them. And so we've gone through this sort of thing, and now we're sort of moving down the other side. And it's important to recognise that, previously it was growing up, and now we're moving down. So we need to start to work with ourselves, and rather than thinking why is it all falling apart, thinking actually that it's a function of shall I say, not paying attention to the detail. And so when we get to a certain level, we start to think we've made it. And this is where the ego, and I've talked about this in previous Satsangas, the ego, which is this temporary personality that's created through the almost total communicative separation from the true entity self, or the higher self, oversoul, or Godhead, starts to take control. And when it starts to think, when we start to get complacent in our thoughts, behaviours and actions, the ego takes over, and so it brings us down. And so what's really happening out there is that collectively our egos, at various different levels, either locally or collectively or individually, are starting to take over again and pull us back down the frequencies, because the ego can only survive when we are further on down the frequencies. And so depending upon where we are, and in terms of our own evolutionary progression and our own self-observation, we either battle it or we just let the ego take over, because it's like falling asleep. It's like falling asleep when you've in a cold environment like hypothermia. You slowly go to sleep because your body starts to shut down because of the cold, and so you come down to lower frequencies quite willingly, because you don't know you're going down the frequencies, because you think you've made it. And so when we start to think in those terms, that we think we've made it, that's when the ego takes over and works at its most efficient from its perspective. So what's happening really is that we all collectively think that we've achieved what we needed to achieve, and we've let go of our self-analysis, our self-critique, our observer self, and we've cruised, we've coasted, and the ego's taken over. So in various different locations of the world, that's either been a very collectively powerful takeover, and so we've dropped down the frequencies, or we've just about hung onto the side of the cliff face and stopped ourselves from dropping down. But from our particular observer position, we've started to realise that things are apparently falling apart. But it's up to us now to start to work with ourselves and start to bring ourselves up the frequencies again, and be an example to those others who have slipped down because they've allowed their ego to take over, and let them see that we've not dropped down with them, and then they can start to come out the other side by following our example again. And of course, being in the same location or within the same friendship or the same circle of acquaintances as somebody who's a higher frequency, those lower frequency individuals get pulled up by default, and so they will start to move upwards. So as long as we're thinking and we're working on ourselves, even though it's difficult to persuade others or to work with others right now, because we might be working in an area which is bordering on a low frequency environment, whereas we're trying to stay in a high frequency environment, or we may pass through them on various different occasions because of our work or because of what we do. We move around the planet. We best help people by being high frequency and refusing to be part of a drop in frequency, refusing to be drawn into gossip, to be drawn into conspiracy, to be drawn into acceptance of poor thoughts, poor behaviours and poor actions, such as throwing the sweet wrapper out of the car window, even if it is a motorway or a freeway. This is all to do with being a lower frequency and allowing the ego to pull us down low frequencies. Okay, so this is what's going on. We are collectively experiencing various different levels of descent in the frequency. Some of us are catching ourselves, others are falling asleep and letting the ego take over, and others are so low down the frequencies because of their environments that they have little chance of pulling themselves up. And so it's up to those individuals who are staying observant and are able to stop their own descent down the frequencies to maintain the thoughts, behaviours and actions of somebody who's highly evolved, and be the example to others, and that'll help to arrest the further reduction in frequency of those others in these various different pockets of locally low or locally very low frequency behaviours, thoughts, behaviours and actions. Okay, so that's what's happening right now. It's all to do with, we've basically become a little bit complacent, and so therefore, depending upon where we are, it either drops down or we catch ourselves and we stay where we are. We have a bit of a safety net. So just for all of you out there who have noticed that there's a drop, please do your best to stay at the level you are and be a good example to others. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go through the questions I've received and move forwards with those questions. Just one moment. Okay, so the first question is about the An dialogues, and it says the An dialogues talks about shards a lot, so I'm going to ask about them. Shards are projections from the aspect, and the aspect is a projection from the true energetic self, what the Hindus call the Godhead, the Royalist canon called the Oversoul, and what we sometimes call the higher self. It's that much bigger part of us which remains disincarnate. Okay, so as an aspect, as a soul, we are a smaller aspect of our true energetic self, and a shard is a smaller aspect projected from the aspect. Okay, so that's where they are. So shards do not have autonomy. So how do they function? How do they make decisions, change direction, change things on their own, assuming they're human, or are they never human? Shards can be incarnate in the human form. They can incarnate in any of the vehicles that are available to us at certain frequencies within the physical universe, and so they're able to make some level of decisions based upon their environment. Now, clearly, they have a limited level of sentience in comparison to the aspect, and which is a limited level of sentience in comparison to the true entity itself. And so, those of you who listened to previous Satsanga lectures will realise that an aspect has a nominal value of 2.5% of the sentience of its true energetic self. If there's 30% allowable to be projected into various different aspects, and there's a maximum of 12 aspects being projected. And this is the same function for shards. There's a maximum of 30% of the sentience of the aspect that can be used for all of the shards that are projected. If there's 12 shards, and there can only be a maximum of 12 shards. So it's 2.5% of 2.5%. So clearly they don't have an awful lot of sentience associated with them. So they make decisions based upon really more like I wouldn't say intuitive, but it's more in the way that animals do. They do it by instinct. They move one direction versus another direction on instinct. And although when communicating with a shard, you could argue that they appear to be and communicate in some form of communicative sense to be on a similar level to humans. They are, but they don't function in the same high level way. I mean, for instance, a shard would not be starting to think in a spiritual way. So they change their direction based upon this instinctive way. they do create things, but they don't create things as a result of being a higher frequency. They create things based upon their own level of sentience. They are human. They can be human. They can be any of the different vehicles that are in the physical universe at various different frequency levels. They tend to be in the third, fourth, fifth frequencies, rather than in anything sort of higher than that. And they would only be in the fourth and fifth if the aspect that they are being projected from is in a higher frequency. Because they tend to be in the same as or lower frequencies because of what their sentience can cope with. So the next question is, how do we aspects create shards? And it said since the questioner has no conscious memories of creating or processing shards. I guess this only occurs when I'm asleep, or with help from my guide, or when I'm disincarnated before or after the physical life completes. The shards are created as a function of the life plan of the aspect, and so when the aspect is projected into the physical, or any other function or any other sort of environments within the physical universe, or any other environments within the multiverse, because the aspect doesn't specifically need to be projected into the physical universe. There was a plan for how many shards that particular aspect will project, and so as incarnate beings, we wouldn't have the bandwidth to allow ourselves to be able to remember what we've agreed in our previous, this incarnate state, or what we've agreed in our life plan. Although we do have intuitive thought processes as to which way we want to go. So when we decide to project a shard, it's not something that we do whilst we are, shall I say, immersed in our incarnation. That means that we are awake from a human perspective. When we are spiritually awake and aware, we'll understand that, oh yes, there's another part of us that's somewhere else, or even there's another aspect as part of our true energetic self in another location. We would start to understand that and feel it and know it. But generally, if there's an aspect projected, a shard projected from the aspect, it's an agreement before the aspect is projected into the environment it's supposed to be in, and so those shards are projected out afterwards, or just after the integration of the aspect within the physical form, or the human form in this instance, or another form within the physical universe. Or in some of the events, those shards can be projected after, as a decision made by the aspect, whilst the human physical form is sleeping, and therefore there is higher communication opportunities available to that aspect with its guide and helpers, and maybe with its true energetic self as well. So, but that's more likely to be a rarer case. So most of the shards are projected or agreed to be projected prior to the incarnation. So the shard is basically a projection. It's like a small soul, a sub-soul, if you want to call it that, is projected from the aspect in the same way that the aspect is projected from the true energetic self. So what I would suggest you do is, if you look at my website and go to the events and lectures, you'll see a lecture there called Who We Are and How We Incarnate, and that particular lecture shows how we do project various aspects of ourselves energetically. It's simply an extension, like an octopus's limb is an extension of the octopus. Energetically, we do the same thing. We project a certain aspect or shard of sentience with some energy into a different arena, different location, and there's a link between that particular aspect of sentience and the energy and the larger aspect of sentience and energy, which in this instance is the shard, and therefore the aspect itself as a larger part. So we don't seem to see, generally, I've not experienced to date any shards being maintained as an energetic being. They tend to be within a physical environment, within the physical universe. Not specifically human, of course, any of the other details as well. So this question is, how do I know I'm not a shard? Does anybody know? The answer is, if you're asking these sort of questions, you're definitely not a shard. If you're a shard, you wouldn't know, but you wouldn't be asking these questions, so you'd be fully immersed in your incarnate state. Okay. And are there shards walking on the earth now? Breathing air, consuming food, fighting war, reading books. Well, they wouldn't be reading my books, and I don't think they'd be reading Dolores' books or Neil Walsh's books or Eckhart Tolle's books either. They'd be basically, being the incarnate being, basically, and they'll be doing their work in a way which is consistent with an individual who is immersed in their incarnate state. So the only way to shards, arguably, it's an interesting question here. Would shards make shard babies? They can still procreate, of course, the same way as every other incarnate being does, and it is very likely that they would create a vehicle that would be used by another shard because of the environment and the way of thinking, behaving and acting they've got. But it's also very likely as well that a shard could procreate and create a baby, and that baby would be occupied by an aspect as well. So this is where you find out that that a soul is born into a body and it breaks away from the environment that it's in. So it may be in a completely aggressive or abhorrent environment, or a difficult to experience environment, or a very low frequency environment, but it might turn out that soul in that human body, that baby, breaks out of it and does something quite remarkable as a result of that. So that's how we find out if there's been an aspect born into a family of shards, for instance. Can we recognise who is and who isn't a shard? Yeah, they're a bit like backfill individuals. They are usually not very overly intelligent, although they can be rich, of course, because intelligence isn't a function of how rich you can be materialistically. But they're generally low thinkers. They're very simple individuals, and it's quite logical to think that those individuals who are low in intelligence are shards, and they can also be backfill people in this instance as well. And can we encounter one or more of our shards? It's rather unlikely that we would encounter our own shards because of the need to diversify. The whole point of a shard is that we're diversifying our opportunity to experience, learn, and evolve. And so, having a shard in the same environment as us, as an aspect, wouldn't actually maximise that effort. Since shards are created to help us grow, is a deceased shard held in status until we're out of the physical for us to progress, or do we absorb that knowledge and experience provided by the shard while we're asleep? If you read the Andalogs, you'll find out that shards have to wait in stasis, and if their physical form demises, they don't recommune with us until we are, as a projected aspect, back into the energetic. So the information there is shared still with us, but we wouldn't spot it. Although we might start to realise we know more knowledge, but only if we sort of thought about it. But generally, most of the information from the shard is absorbed by us and absorbed by the true energetic self on an automatic basis, anyway, on a regular basis, on a sort of a real-time basis, so to speak. And do we need to be at least concerned about our shards? Should we send them light, encourage them, bless them in our meditations? In short, do we treat our shards like automatons or beings on a spiritual journey who need our support as well? We just send them our love, and we treat them the same as everything else. That they are still beings on a spiritual journey. It's just that their sentience content is significantly lower than ours, but they are still part of us, part of our true energetic self, part of source and part of origin. So we have to support them where we can. And therefore, because they are experiencing hardships usually, or different environments, or difficult environments, then we should be expressing gratitude, because they're experiencing things that on our behalf, basically, they're giving us a greater level of experience because we are asking them to do so. Okay, well, it's a good set of questions, that, which is very, very good. Thank you for that. Thank you, JM, for those questions. And now we've got another JM as well, who's asking me some questions about the Heart Sutra. The question is, the Heart Sutra keeps reminding me that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. And it would seem that this is the lesson in all frequencies and dimensions. Is that true? Eckhart Tolle would argue that everything is formless, and in a lot of respects his argument is true, because it is, everything is amorphous in real terms. It's just that those smaller aspects that are being created for the benefit of origin and the benefit of source to experience, learn and evolve, have decided to use a structure or be moved into a structure to experience that structure. And as soon as we have structure, or the recognition of structure, then we have form. So the comment about form is emptiness and emptiness is form is correct. There is nothing that is formless in its entirety. Formlessness is a human understanding. So we would expect form to be something like something we've created, like a chair, for instance, or a motor car, or a house, or an aeroplane, or a bridge across a river. Whereas in essence, the moment we, as disincarnate entities, think of something or create something, then we create form. So we create form out of the formlessness, and then when we finish with that form, it becomes formlessness again, because it becomes back into what it is. I mean, the essence of the origin is that there is structure there, but that which is within the structure, if it isn't considered or isn't focused upon, remains formless structure, although it is structure. It's only when we start to work with that formlessness that we create form. When we focus on something, we give it form, and it's pretty much as coherent as that. And even when we are working on scientific experiments, that which is formless becomes formed when we focus on it. So only when we disfocus on it, we start to learn that the formlessness comes into it, or the randomness comes into it. But randomness is form in its own right as well. So do we need to embrace that no matter what forms are appearing? Yeah, we basically have to realise that everything that has form is created. But everything that is created returns back to formlessness. And that's the thing to think about. Everything, even energy, is form. So when we just focus on that energy, it becomes formless. So we need to think of it. That's the thing. So the challenge seems to remember that what is appearing is at once nothing, yet part of the whole, which is absolutely correct. And this is the comment here, as we are the same, nothing, yet part of everything. And absolutely, we are form. We are the formless, given form to experience the formless, or the form. And that's one way to think about it as well. So that's another, although it's a short series of questions there, or confirmations. That's another excellent series of questions here. So thank you again, the other JM. And they live in the same, reasonably in the same hemisphere of the world, but separated by some water there. So thank you for both of you. Next question is by ME, and this is interesting because this is related to the lecture at the start, by the way. So there's a preamble to this, and there's a preamble to the questions as well. So I'm going to go through the preamble now. Although I'll go through this quite quickly, don't worry. This is part of the transcript as well. That lovely lady US also does for us, and there's a couple of questions from that lady as well at the end. So here we go. I'm seeing two worlds, or multiple reality, that coexist. I'm realising that my own transition off of the mainstream society with regards to how we work, live, think, etc. is also shifting. Has been for some time transitioning out of reality into my own world that we create. But it seems suddenly clearer in thinking about the Satsangas, particularly the questions. From everybody, it seems to be focused on this same theme. That theme being that we're all feeling like like we're in a spiritual sinkhole is opening on the planet compared to how it used to feel a few years ago. Why does it all fall apart? Part of the lecture at the start. It's I cannot help to see, but with even clearer sight, the ineffectiveness of the world, as it has been in so many places. Governments have not been working properly, banks not lending, the haves to have-not ratio seems to be exploding in terms of the mass public, and the mass public revolves across the globe. Now the darkness before the dawn on the horizon. I cannot help but feel that this is all for the upcoming better world view that will emerge. That's a thought process. Good. We are becoming aware that we're dropping down. We're becoming aware that we're moving forwards. We're becoming aware that we need to look after ourselves. We're becoming aware that we need to monitor ourselves and change ourselves based upon that monitoring. So to continue the preamble, you mentioned the last Satsanga, the point of our incarnation is to improve our efficiency at attaining our life plan. And you got several questions on this. Efficiency is defined as well-organised, effectual, resource, or competent in Webster's dictionary. So it's being better. Yeah. Applied here, what strategies can you suggest that we produce to improve our approach to that which we increase our efficiency at moving through our lives and our life plans? How do we become more well-organised, effectual, resourceful, and competent at following our life plan? How about even getting access to knowing a more assured life plan? The question here is basically to do with self-analysis and not going down the same road again. If we use the observer self and we recognise that we've achieved something that's good, then next time we exposed to that which allowed us to achieve that response, then we should use the same response or a more improved response. If we, for instance, are exposed to something that is not that has resulted in a suboptimal response, then in the meantime we've recognised this. We can work on a better response. That when we're exposed to a similar thing again, or a similar environment, or a similar interaction with others, then we choose to use the better response. Then that makes it more efficient. So it's all about learning from our lessons and not making the same mistakes again. Although making mistakes isn't an issue, it's about trying not to make so many mistakes. So why would we learn to open the door without the key 12 times when all we need to do is find the key and open it once? Those sorts of things. Okay, so it's about recognising who and what we are, and moving forwards to enable ourselves to really move forwards and allow ourselves to make the mistakes once if we need to, but also move forwards with those mistakes by understanding what we need to do to respond better. Okay. If efficiency is needed, then why have a veil between our true energetic self and the aspects and or shard that we call the self? In brackets, the veil between the higher self and the self and the part that's living in this body in this lifetime is personally created by the ego. It seems the veil is filtering the plan, keeping us from totally understanding what we are, and this is a hindrance to our efficiency at achieving the plan. Can I elaborate? The whole point of it is to try to do it in a way which is both efficient but providing a growth pattern. So if we knew what to expect and knew how to respond, then it would be a pointless exercise. So we need to experience what we're experiencing and move on with that experience as fast a way as possible, whilst not being aware of what the best response is. So that's all part of the game. If you want to understand it, that it's gaining the growth through the experience of not knowing what the best route forwards is, and establishing and creating that best route forward through our own experience, and being efficient in the implementation of the changes required to make that response a better response the next time we experience it. And the continued sort of preamble here is that I feel as a child until the age of 7 or 9, we have a clear connections to know this life plan that fade in the modern culture and society. So we do know a bit more because we're more connected when we're children. We certainly when we get sort of contaminated by existence that we start to lose it. Are there any clear connections between the true energetic self and our current incarnate being that are associated with the youth and naivety? Yeah, it's called being reprogrammed. As children, we are more connected to who and what we are, but we are constantly reprogrammed by our parents because they've also been reprogrammed by their parents and their family and friends and relatives and work colleagues, and so we get to the point where, in essence, we become reprogrammed to being the human being, to being immersed in the human state. So the objective is, if we have children, then we try to help them maintain their spiritual state, so that as they grow up, they're not reprogrammed into the immersed human being. Their programming is maintained to being an aspect that's incarnate, that is trying to work here, think, behave, and act in the right way, and being in the physical but not of the physical. And so there's other bits and pieces here as well. So the topic listed for this Satsanga is what's happening to the world spiritually, why things appear to be falling apart when it's previously looking good. And this is part of it, because actually, as we get reprogrammed, and we drop them the frequencies, we get reprogrammed again. We drop them the frequencies, we get reprogrammed again. And so things do appear to be dropping down because we're constantly being reprogrammed, and the ego likes it, because the further down the frequencies we go, the more control of us the ego's got, and therefore it perpetuates its own existence. So, getting back to the topic of the previous lecture, what's happened to the world spiritually and why things appear to be falling apart, does this happen? And back to the preamble, does this have anything to do with the duality where we're currently living in being on the precipice of shifting paradigms? Yes, but as long as we're observing the shifting paradigms and working with them, and stopping ourselves from dropping those shifting paradigms, then we start to remove the duality. Okay, so based on the duality, at the tipping point, the extremes on each polarised end are the maximum points before the collapse of the current trajectory. And our modern society seems to be at this juncture. It is in this juncture in some areas, but it's not in others. So collectively, we need to try to stop that, to change the tipping point so it tips on the higher frequency side rather than the lower frequency side. And the comment about, can this be causing the feeling it's all falling apart? And the answer is yes, because we're seeing that there's so many areas that are in this knife edge condition where we're moving lower rather than higher, for instance, and therefore the spiritual beings who are stopping ourselves from dropping down, we can feel that it is starting to fall apart, because there was previously a more cohesive state, a higher base resonant frequency, rather than now pockets of high and pockets of locally low frequency or locally high frequency. So can it be that both are correct and we're seeing the veil lifted to expose the nature of reality since we are in duality, meaning that yes, things are falling apart and yes, things are improving whilst simultaneously falling apart, but you could have to take a broader perspective and frame of reference to see these improvements in the current world. Can you elaborate how we can experience in both? Generally, those are who are experiencing this potential, observing the falling apart, so to speak, or observing the downward trend, are experiencing a higher level of understanding. The ability to catch yourself falling down and moving and stopping that means that you are moving up the frequencies in general, but it's difficult to move up the frequencies when everything else around you is dropping down. But it is also an indication that for us as an individual, our particular veil is not only lifting, but it's also allowing us to become more questioning of our environment. And so that level of questioning is allowing us to stay where we are, rather than drop down. And there's another commentary here to part of this, saying that the idea that it all depends upon where you focus and how you see the current existence. And here's an example. It is easy to see things are falling apart geopolitically, and list is long with regarding to change in the status quo. Places that were the beacon of tolerance and an open society have shifted. For example, the UK and Brexit, the USA and Trump, France and whatever's going on there, voting now, and Venezuela is collapsing. The World Banks of Japan, the USA and the EU are about to be in a global financial tailspins, and the US is on the brink of pulling us all into the admitted open war, as opposed to the covert wars that have been going on since covert, as opposed to the covert wars that have been going on since World War II ended. This is the Cold Wars, of course, and the political wars, and the sort of the Iron Curtain, and all these sorts of things, and the things that are happening now in Korea, of course. In the same list describing what is falling apart, do you see these very things? Do you see these very same things? Countries in the ripples of society have not been actually serving all of their constituents. It could be said that these organisations and nations have not been working as efficiently as attaining their own life plans, which I think must exist at some level. All things humankind generates to segregate their thoughts, cultures, nations, organisations, sports and teams, etc. So that means basically all of these things are a function of us collectively going down or collectively experiencing a stasis. And so, in essence, if we are collectively allowing things to happen, because we are pulled into this collective condition where we can collectively allow that to happen because it can't possibly happen, but we do allow it to happen because we become complacent, is why big things happen. Things like banks going to a financial tailspin, things like votes within different countries being resulting in not what was expected because we're all complacent. And certainly within the UK, a lot of people were complacent about the Brexit vote, and probably the same with the US, for instance. People thought they didn't need to do anything because it couldn't possibly happen. But it did happen, and so therefore we were complacent. And so we have spiritual complacency in there as well, which is a function of ego, of course. The ego is making us think that we've made it spiritually, and so we let go of our constant monitoring, our constant observing of ourselves, and constant checking and rechecking and correction. And so collectively we are pulled down by our collective ego, as it were. And so these things aren't just failing from an individual perspective, but they're failing from a collective perspective as well, because we're collectively supporting each other in going down the slippery slope. So on top of this, what role do the 5 universal laws of attraction, vibration, gratitude, love, and allowing play in the current duality of our experiencing negativity of the current times, and that the seeming loss of common respect for humanity, civility, peace, knowledge, and diversity? In effect, some of the stuff like attraction, gratitude, love, and allowing are, if you like, sort of maintained, but the allowingness drops out, and the vibration drops down, because we are having less respect for ourselves, living less civility, not so bothered about peace, and certainly diversity seems to be totally out the window, really. So it's a case of the universal laws are being ignored locally and individually at times. And so this is a function of free will, We have the ability to have free will and, work with these laws. And although they are laws, and if we were in a working as a collective, we would not be working against these laws, because we have the opportunity to work in an individualised free will. We do start to, shall I say, steer around these laws, so to speak, and so we do start to ignore them to some respects. Now, clearly, we're starting to see the fruit of these of ignoring these laws, and having areas of locally low frequency, which are created through allowing the ego individually and collectively to take over, allowing us to find the various different thought, behaviours and actions to be acceptable, is a function of this. Okay. So more commentary here. Here's those laws as I've known. The law of attraction. We attract whatever we choose to give our attention to. Certain energies will coalesce together like electrons, attracting one type to another. All things are in constant motion. This allows energy types to group. Yes, this birds of a feather flock together. whether we're low frequency birds or high frequency birds, we always flock together. So there are times when high frequency birds start to get attracted to low frequency birds because the frequency of that bird is dropping, and so the ego is taking over. Law of vibration, the next part of the commentary: everything in the universe vibrates at a known frequency. Control what you allow yourself to resonate with or vibe with. Resonating with gossip is low frequency. Resonating with higher frequency translates into higher resonant energy, or AKA power, or ki. In effect, vibration is a function of our frequency, and so if we have low frequency thoughts, behaviours and actions, we do drop down, such as gossiping is a low frequency thought. Higher frequency thoughts, behaviours and actions are of being of service to others in a completely selfless way, and so one goes up, one goes down. Okay. Law of gratitude: action and reaction are equal and opposite at all times. In other words, be thankful for the provisions of the universe, and in turn the universe will return you positive energy. What you focus on will grow, good or bad. Without gratitude there can be no personal power. Absolutely. And gratitude is humility and humbleness. I know, but be careful. But the spirit, the ego can use that against us. We can have sort of negative spirituality, if you like, where our humility and our service can be used for egotistical purposes. So we have to be careful with our how we interpret our gratitude, how we interpret how our being of service is. Because the ego can use it against us as well if we're not careful. Law of love here is being commented as being a gentle way to be gentle in the way we speak, think, and act towards things, embracing all life, grow with it, and connect to it. Yes, and realise that those who are thinking, behaving, and acting in a negative way, or a suboptimal way is a better way of saying it, are also souls who are struggling with their incarnate condition, who are struggling to maintain themselves and their path associated with their life plan as well. So, love everything and everyone, irrespective of whom what they do. But also recognise that they sometimes need help to change direction to be in a more efficient and more evolutionary, caring and loving way. And the law of allowing is the complete cycle of energy allowing manifestation of creative thoughts. By being welcoming to the unknown, you open the space to allow what you want to manifest, even though you're unclear on how it will manifest or when. Being open versus resisting. Yes, but also in terms of the law of allowing, or in terms of the law of being in the flow, so to speak, working with the flow of the universe and working with the flow of our life plan, we have to recognise what is being in the allowing state, or being in the flow, versus being in resistance, or trying to manipulate the flow, or trying to work around the law of allowing. And so we have to start to understand that if we work in certain ways, it goes against the flow, it creates resistance, it works against allowing. If we work in other ways, which are more relaxed and more in keeping with being in the flow and being in the moment and allowing things to happen around us and working with those things rather than resisting them, then we are in the law of allowing, and things do come to us more easily. Okay, so those are a very good series of questions there, and there's just two more by the lady who does all the transcriptions at US, and it's based upon the book that I'm working on now, which is called The Curators, and it really is a little bit of trying to get to a bit of a preamble or pre-information about this book. And it said, first question is, what is the most amazing or surprising thing to come out of the Curators, in my view? The complexity so far of the number of entities that are working with the multiversal environment to allow us to evolve. And also, and this is part of the second question, the number of maintenance entities versus the entities that are in the evolutionary cycle. So the second part of the question is, why did the maintenance entities evolve? I can come to that. So there's 88% of maintenance entities who are in the service of us as entities. 12% of us are in the evolutionary cycle. So out of 100% of entities that have been created by the source, only 12% are in the evolutionary cycle. The other 88% are maintaining the multiverse, which is an interesting thing to think about. But so the most amazingly surprising thing is the number of these different individuals, the plethora of different roles they've got, the fact that some of these entities manipulate event space to correct things, and that actually things are steered to some extent. They do work with event spaces. They move event spaces around. Sometimes they reconnect them. They transplant them. They create them. They uncreate them. They put them in stasis. They put them in quarantine. They do all sorts of different things to try to maintain a coherent and a more efficient series of event spaces called an event stream. And so the amount of work they do to do that is amazing, and I'm constantly surprised at the amount of work these entities do, and the number of entities that work with the manipulation of event space. That's one of the most surprising things, and also the level of interdependability that these entities have got, and there's a lot of crossover functions with them. You could argue that these things are sort of doing each other's work sometimes, and that's the most surprising thing as well. But when I think about it, the multiverse, or the maintenance of the multiverse, must be such an amazingly difficult thing to do, that we need all of these entities to do that, and they must overlap a lot, and they do overlap a lot. And that's one of the most difficult things that I've been able to come to grips with is that the amount of work that these beings do in terms of manipulating event space, which is an intelligence in its own right within the structure of the origin, and therefore within the structure of the source, and therefore part of our multiverse, and the fact that these entities deal with different realities, and they work with the different fractals created by choice, by dualities, trialities, quadrualities, etc. And so that's one of the things that I found really quite amazing so far. And the date of this particular satsanga, I'm only about 72,200-ish words into this book, and I've got a lot more to do, a lot more. So it's going to be an interesting book, although I am a little bit worried about where the overlap is between some of these different functions of these entities, although I'm starting to realise that there does need to be this overlap to make sure that there is the work that they're doing is coherent and repeatable and robust as well. And it said, why do maintenance? The next question from US is, why do the maintenance entities evolve more slower than incarnated entities? It's a bit counterintuitive to me, since they have the entire multiversal structure to work with, and since there's 88% of them. Yes. Now, interestingly enough, guides and helpers evolve faster than any other entity, because they are given evolutionary content by the entities who they look after. So as we evolve, we give our guide and helpers evolutionary content to thank them, basically. If you want to, you can rather jokingly call it an evolution tax. It's not. It's been in gratitude for the help that they've given us in our own particular incarnation, where they've guided us through our incarnation and made us more efficient as a result of that, in terms of our experience and the reduction in karma as a result of that. But for the maintenance entities, they're doing it purely out of service, and they don't have the interaction with incarnate entities who are in the evolutionary cycle in the same way as the guide and helpers do. And so they're happy to be evolving in the way which is, if you like, quite slow, but nevertheless repeatable and consistent as a result of that. And so at the end of the day, although they are going to experience evolution as fast as what those individuals within the evolutionary cycle will do, they won't go back into communion with the source at the end of this evolutionary cycle as fast as some of us will, because some of us finish our evolutionary cycle faster than others. They will move back into communion with source at the end of the evolutionary cycle when it's all done and dusted. And so they will have to evolve more slowly anyway as a result of that. Eventually they will get to the same evolutionary level, but they evolve slower because, if you think about it, they've got to evolve at the speed of the slowest entity. So that slowest entity can finish its evolutionary cycle and then go into communion with source. And then when that happens, these entities who have been providing the environment for that last entity will then be able to go into communion themselves. So it's a function of what they're doing, and they've been created and have chosen this level of service as a result of that. Each of us had a choice. Do we want to be in the evolutionary cycle and choose incarnation as one of those means of accelerating that cycle, or do we want to go into service as being guide and helpers, or do you want to go into service in terms of maintaining the environments that those entities who are in the evolutionary cycle use, and that those entities who are helping those entities in the evolutionary cycle also use as well. And so they're being of extreme service, and they sacrifice the speed at which they evolve for the benefit of others. But nevertheless, they will evolve to the same level. It's just that they will wait until the last entities recommuned with Source before they all commune as well. Okay, so this is a huge amount of questions. Thank you very much to everybody who's asked this question, and I'm looking forward to the next set of questions in the next World Satsanga. But to finish off this Satsanga, for the next sort of 10 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is just to go through the mechanics of opening the third eye in the way that I do it. Now, there's various different ways of doing this, and the imagery is just one particular way of doing it. So I apologise for any any errors there, or any incorrect thought processes. If you just close your eyes, okay, and if you want to, you can put your feet flat on the ground in the usual meditative state with your palms uppermost on your upper thighs and your closed eyes focusing on the area of the third eye, okay. This is more of a guided meditation, or actually I wouldn't even call this meditation, actually I'll call it a guided function of how to open the third eye. Now, the way I see it is that around the area of the third eye there's a cover, okay, so remove that cover from that area of the third eye, okay. Think of it as removing a sticking plaster over an area that is normally like concave, for instance. Now in this area behind the forehead there is lots of different sort of rather mechanical looking components, and so you pull those components out of that cavity just behind the area of the third eye. So I pull out a reflector, I'll pull out a lens, I'll pull out a switch and a lock for the switch to keep the switch on, and also I pull out what's effectively a bulb, if you want to call it that, okay? So I pull this out and I clean the area that I've just removed all these components from. Okay, I energetically clean it. I bathe the area in silver light, and silver is known to be a disinfectant as well, and is very good not only in physical healing, because silver is used in a lot of plasters, but it's also good to use it in energy healing as well by bathing it in the silver light. Okay, so the cover is off the area of the forehead. So visualise there's a cavity there. We've pulled out these components of a reflector, a switch, a bulb, okay, and a lens, and I remove any protective covering off this reflector, and I put the reflector back inside the cavity and clip it into place right at the back. Okay, so it's right at the reflector is right at the back, and then I see a cover inside the cavity again, where there's a connection for this bulb, as it were. Okay, this bulb is actually the pineal gland, if you want to call it that. So I take the cover off, and I go back to my store of components that I've just pulled out, and in a bag there is another bulb, and I open this bag and take the protection for the cover off, and I connect this bulb onto the connection within the cavity just behind the forehead. So we've now got a reflector and a bulb there. I told you it was rather mechanical, so please try not to chuckle too much, but the function of it works. The idea of this visualization works. So now I have a switch. Now the switch is a very basic, old-fashioned switch that you might have seen on various different old science fiction films, where it's a lever that you pull up from one side to another side to create a connection, rather like one of the old-fashioned switches that Tesla may have used, okay, in the old days. So think of it in those sorts of things. It's a switch that allows you to switch high voltage and high amperage electricity. So I flick this switch up, okay, and then I put a bar through some part of it so that the switch can't become unswitched, and I put a padlock on the end. So I lock that switch up, and it's staying in a made state. So there's now spiritual energy going through that switch and powering the bulb up. And the bulb, the way I see it, it starts to flicker a little bit like a fluorescent light bulb, and eventually, when there's enough voltage in there and enough heat, it energises the gases within the fluorescent light bulb start to fluoresce, and we get the glow. And it's the same thing with this bulb that's representing the pineal gland. It starts to glow. When it starts to glow, the light bounces off the reflector at the back of the cavity of the third eye and is projected forwards. But that's unfocused light now. That's unfocused clairvoyance, clairsentience and clairaudience. It's unfocused. It's just blasting out. It's this pineal gland is projecting spiritual connectivity, spiritual understanding, spiritual seeing, hearing and knowing from this area. So we need to focus it, and so the lens that I've got, in that series of components that I've pulled out from behind, from within that cavity in the forehead, I start to clip in place over the front of the forehead. So the light coming out from that bulb, which represents the pineal gland, and is being reflected from the reflector at the back, now starts to be focused via this lens. Okay, but again, that lens needs to be held in place, and so I put a lock into that lens to help it stay in the locked position, in that clipped position. So now we have the ability for the third eye, the spiritual eye, to be projected in a lensed way, but it still isn't in focus. And so what I do then is I use a visualization process of, if you like, having this lens being manipulated in the same way as a camera lens. So I rotate the camera this lens that's on the front of the forehead in a way which brings any imagery into sharp focus, and actually brings it into what I would classify as 3D focus. And so we have the 3D focus. So it's a sharp, high definition focus. So visualize an image that goes from being out of focus into sharp, high definition, three-dimensional focus. And when you've got that, sort of lock it into place. Visualize the lock on the lens. It locks it into place. And then I also visualize that this is linked into a computer program or a diagnostic routine or something where the locking is locked at all the different levels associated with the chakras, and therefore is also locked into the same place of the energies associated with the energetic templates that the chakras work with, and also that also represents again the energies associated with the auric layers, because the auric layer is an electromagnetic representation of the energies that are being broadcast. So I tick. If I visualize a computer screen that's saying lock with the lens, and I tick all the boxes to say that they're all locked as well, so that the first energetic template, which is the etheric body, is also linked in, locked on. The mental body is locked on. The astral body is locked on. Okay, and the rest up to the catharic template is also locked on. And then I press a save button, and so that is all locked on now and in focus. But that's just focus. That's just the depth. That doesn't create a depth of vision. So we need to be able to have the focus on, no matter how deep into the image we see now. So I then, for want of a better word, have a dial in front of me, rather like a UV meter, but it's more assigned towards signal strength. And there's a line, there's an area in the middle which is right. If I turn a dial one way, a needle goes to the right. If I turn it the other way, it goes to the left. And the idea is to have the needle settle in the middle, where there's a calibration point where it's neither too out of focus in front, but in focus at the back of the image, or it's in focus at the front of the image and out of focus at the back of the image. And so I want to move the needle now, this dial. So I'll bring the needle into the center point so that the image is in focus at the front of the image and at the back of the image. This is called depth of focus if using camera terminology. It's like using an f-stop, for instance, so that you can gain the focus at the front and at the back of the image, so that you're not having it go out of focus at the back, for instance. So I rotate the knob until this pointer is in the center of this dial, okay, or this meter. It's like a UV meter, if you want to call it that, or signal strength meter. And again, I then go into my computer screen, my diagnostics, and I visualise a tick box that says lock, and I select that tick box that says lock, and I do the same thing again on a tick box that's representing all of the different energetic templates, the 7 energetic templates that are also aligned with the different chakras, and also the auric layers. And I tick those boxes as well, and then I tick the save. And so what I've done then is I've created the third eye, the function of the third eye. I've awakened the third eye. I've given it focus, but I've then given it, I've lensed it, and then I've given it focus, then I've given it depth of focus. So the third eye is working in its raw state. The lens in front gives it focus, or should I say lensing, the ability to have it focused. So it's raw energy first, raw connectivity, raw experience. Put the lens in front, it starts to create the ability to have it focused or manipulated, or its direction or depth of focus changings. We use the camera lens idea to create focus and create a focus on an image, and then we use this signal strength idea to create the depth of focus, rather like an f-stop on a computer lens. And I've locked them in place, locked the focus in place, locked the depth of focus in place. And that's it really. That's all that's needed to be done. And once you've done that, you may find that you have feeling tingling around the forehead, or pressure just inside the forehead, like somebody's pressing their thumb into your forehead. And sometimes you get tingling on top of the head, or tingling around the periphery of the skull. And then that means if you get that physical response, not all of you will get that, but if you get that physical response, it means that you're getting some sort of physical feedback to let you know that you've done the work. Some of you won't get that because you may be already operating on a higher frequency anyway. So the pulling up of the energies associated with the gross physical aren't as pronounced in terms of the differential. So some of you might not feel it, but those of you who do, just know it's there. So functions of the third eye aren't just clairvoyance. They're mostly to do with, in clairvoyance is mostly to do with seeing things in your mind's eye, although some people do also see it overlaid in their physical eye as well. It's also to do with clairaudience, so we hear our spiritual ear also works from it, and clairsentience, so our spiritual knowing, spiritual cosmic knowing is also part of it. So opening the third eye, it opens up the modality for 3 different levels of extrasensory perception, so to speak, to allow us to not just experience the 5 senses associated with the gross physical, but also being able to visualize things and hear things in terms of our communicating with other entities and in other environments, but also understanding things, knowing things, and be able to work with different concepts as well. So, when you're ready and you've gone through this, you can play this recording a number of different times to go through it, get the idea, and then go through the function of opening your third eye. So when you're ready, you can slowly come back into the room and drink some water to help you with this. I know I've gone through it quite quickly, so please forgive me for that. But this is the way I do it, and actually it can happen quite quickly with people. And I've opened some people's third eyes. They've almost done it themselves, whereas others I've struggled with because they've been resisting the idea. But when you do it for yourself, go through the recording a few times, get an idea of the process, and get an idea of some of the things I've repeated, and the fact that maybe they've missed something when I've spoken too quickly, so I apologise for that, so go over it again. When you've got an idea of the process and the stages you go through, have a go and do it yourself, and you'll be surprised. I know you'll be surprised at how things happen. But don't think they're going to happen straight away. Sometimes they may do, but moreover, it'll take a bit of time for it to become part of you. You'll notice your intuition starts to increase. Your intuition starts to be more accurate than your logic. And what I would say is work on your intuition first. Work on trusting your intuition. Build upon your intuition. Know that your intuition is more powerful than logic, and is more likely to be more accurate than logic. So if you on those times when you do logic your way out of using your intuition, and you find out that your intuition was right, then don't chastise yourself. Just use it as an example that you're being given that your intuition is more powerful than logic. Okay. So intuition is more powerful than logic in every way and shape and form, and it's a way that's showing you that your third eye is working. And when you're starting to concentrate on something, even if it's a physical piece of work, and you are starting to use your third eye, you'll notice that the pressure around your forehead will start to increase, and it'll be like a very, very gentle headache in that area. That tells you your third eye is being used to help you solve a physical problem as well. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening to this World Satsanga on the 28th of April 2017 in conjunction with the Moore Show, and Kevin will be broadcasting this on his YouTube channel as well. So I'm thanking Kevin for that. He's doing an absolutely fantastic job in his own right. And do visit his website as well, which is themooreshow.co.uk, and see some of the work that he's doing as well. And thank you again for those individuals who are asking the questions, who are listening to the Satsanga, and who are broadcasting it in their own way. And I look forward to working with you again, in May's Satsanga, which again will be probably the last weekend in May. So thank you again, much love to you all, and namaste.
Did you see the aliens in Crete?